And then there's going to, it's going to kind of create a virtuous cycle between the models getting better, demanding more data. The more data comes, it makes the models better, et cetera. And I think we're really starting to see the early parts of that. And I think it could ultimately become entirely transformative on blowing open things like the Earth observation market, because it suddenly creates, frankly, a real commercial reason for it to exist.
From the Defense and Aerospace Report, this is The Downlink, a podcast about the intersection of space, the space business, and defense. Not just what's over the horizon, but what's happening above it. I'm your host, Laura Winter. The Trump administration finally released its much-anticipated national security strategy hours before recording this introduction. It's an interesting manuscript that admits that some of the ideas presented are in fact rooted in U.S. President James Monroe's 1823 address to Congress. In that address, President Monroe declared that North, Central, and South America were located within the United States sphere of interest, and he warned European powers against interfering in the affairs of the Western Hemisphere. This strategy is called the Monroe Doctrine, and as such, the authors of this 2025 National Security Strategy devote many paragraphs to the future of the same geographic territory. But as for the territory above the Kármán line, space policy wonks will find little. The word space appears just twice in 33 pages, and only once does that word refer to the space domain. That's in contrast to the prior administration strategy document, which mentioned space 16 times. The Golden Dome project, calling for space-based interceptors and sensors to shield the United States from missile attack, it got one mention. Artificial intelligence, 4 mentions. And that's relevant because this week's guest is Jonny Dyer, CEO and co-founder of Muon Space. This company leverages AI, and so do its customers. They include the Space Force, the Space Development Agency, NRO, and Google. I spoke with Jonny about AI, his company's latest partnership with SpaceX, and Google's new Earth observation play. Here's our conversation. Hello, Jonny. Thank you for making the time to come on the Downlink podcast. Welcome.
Hi, Laura. Thank you for having me. Excited to chat.
Jonny, you have been working in space systems for a while. I think it's been about 21 years since you started out as a SpaceX intern. This is going to feel a little like an episode of This Is Your Life, but bear with me. I'm going to whittle this down to the highlights. Now, in 2007, right out of Stanford with a master's degree in mechanical engineering, you worked on propulsion systems at the Space Propulsion Group. 2 years later, you became the chief engineer at Skybox Imaging. And in 2014, Google acquired Skybox for $500 million and renamed that company Terabella. And please do correct me if I'm wrong. You joined Google with that acquisition. And at Google, you led Google Maps data collection team. 2 of the products most of us out here are familiar with are Google Maps overhead image view of a location and street view. And then in 2019, you joined Lyft as one of the directors of that company's Level 5 autonomous vehicle project. Now, Level 5, and I really did have to look this up, Level 5 means that there is absolutely no human in charge. There's no steering wheel or pedals. And that division was sold to Toyota for $550 million in 2021. But prior to that sale in 2020, you left Lyft and you joined up with Dan McAleese, Muon's chief scientist. And together, you guys founded Muon Space. You're the CEO. So tell us a little bit about your day-to-day. What do you really do as the head of Muon? And tell us a little bit about the company. What does it do?
Well, what I do for the company is very little, actually. I mean, that's the curse of being a CEO. I get to do very little actual work. No, in all seriousness, it's every day is different. We are, some days are all about people and scaling our teams. Other days are about diving deep on a particular technical problem or issue, I'm still an engineer. I still like getting in the weeds on the technical stuff. Other days are working with investors and trying to make sure we can capitalize the company or customers. I spend a lot of time these days with customers and trying to shape and develop a lot of the projects that we're working on. So the nice thing about being a CEO is every day is a little different, and that definitely keeps me on my toes. It's also pretty exhausting.
And who
So
are
what
your customers?
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah. So I can say a little bit more about the company, what we're trying to do, but our customers span. It's a very broad set of types of customers. So we have a very vibrant commercial customer set. Most of these are customers that are, often for the first or sometimes second, but first few times trying to do something in space that, historically maybe has never been possible or has been, sort of inaccessible for cost or complexity reasons, and we're helping them deploy a capability in space for the first time. We also have many and a growing number of sort of national security customers that span the DoD and the IC. And those customers, again, are similarly looking for capabilities either to augment or replace things that have capabilities they've historically had that need to be upgraded, or in many cases, we're working on things that are entirely new, which is very exciting and kind of delivering new capability that hasn't existed before in space. And we also have some nonprofit. We have a nonprofit customer today, maybe more in the future. And this is very near and dear to many of our hearts. It's this global wildfire constellation with a global nonprofit called Earth Fire Alliance. That's a unique one. We have a very, very deep partnership. It's more than just a customer vendor relationship with that nonprofit. And we, share a very strongly held view of trying to have a huge impact on the global wildfire problem. So that just gives a little bit of a snapshot of some of the types of folks that we work with.
And how many employees do you have and where are you?
So we're about 200 folks as of now. We've been growing very quickly. We're in the Bay Area. So for those that you know the Bay Area, we're in Mountain View, right across from the Costco, sort of right near where Google HQ is.
Hey, it's a great place to be if you got to go get some, good booze for that,
Yeah.
Friday night, pizza party.
Well, funny story. My one of my co-founders, Paul, the way we found this place was he claims he was buying food, but I'm pretty sure he was buying booze at Costco. And he looked across the street and saw the for lease sign. So you're not too far from the truth, actually.
Funny. Now, as if you're not busy enough, right? Aren't you also an operating partner at Space Capital?
Yeah, I've known the Space Capital folks for a long time. They're also, full disclosure, investors in Muon as well.
And I just had
And
Chad on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, so I had to raise this point.
Good. Yeah, you got to plug Space Capital. I mean, yeah, Chad. So Chad's great, close friend and investor. And when they were starting the first fund, they were looking for folks that kind of knew the space to be able to, just answer a phone call if they had a question about a company they were looking at or wanted to talk to a founder. And so I've done that for the last, I guess it's going on 6 or 7 years now, and it's been great. It's a lot of fun because I get to. It's a little bit of a different part of sort of my day to day that I get to go look at things that are totally different than what we're doing here at Muon.
Yeah, it keeps you fresh and keeps you across, the rest of the sector, which a
Hmm.
lot is going on. But let's talk about Muon, right? Latest news. And there are actually a number of recent announcements. And I just got to apologize now because I know that we're not going to get to all of them because there have been a number of very serious
Hmm.
ones in quick succession. But let's start with the newest first, and that is the SpaceX agreement. Now, the
Hmm.
agreement means that SpaceX's mini lasers will be integrated into Muon's Halo platform in the first quarter of 2027, right? SpaceX tested and validated these mini lasers in August, at least according to them. And these mini lasers are specifically designed to be integrated with other satellites and with commercial space stations. And SpaceX claims that they can transmit up to 25 gigabytes at distances of up to 4,000 kilometers. Longer distances will mean lower speeds or longer transmission times. And conversely, shorter distances will result in higher transmission speeds. And this is really, really hard stuff because these lasers are on the Starlink satellites and they'll be on Muon satellites, and everything is moving really, really, really fast, right? So there's an orchestration and a timing piece to all of this. But if I'm not mistaken, Muon is the first company to sign up, or at least among the first. And so I want to know why, right? What's the value that this will bring to Muon and to Muon's customers? What's the use case that is envisaged for this?
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of the work that we do, not all of it, but a lot of it is what I would call very data intensive missions. So, missions that create or generate huge amounts of data from things like sensors that we're flying on our spacecraft, trying to observe different phenomenon or things on Earth or in space. And those huge amounts of data, often there's bottlenecks all over that prevent us from rapidly getting it out to where that data is ultimately needed. And many of those bottlenecks include things like getting the data from the spacecraft to a place on the ground or potentially even to another spacecraft. So fundamentally what this does is it removes a huge bottleneck that has traditionally been part of almost every satellite that's ever been launched in history. This very strong kind of dependence on relatively narrowband communications to the ground. And the analogy I like to use with this is it's a little bit like, in the 90s, I'm going to, age myself a little bit here, but we used to have these things called dial-up modems that you would like get on your computer, and your computer wasn't connected to anything, and then it made a bunch of weird noises, and then suddenly you could kind of trickle data back and forth with servers.
I
And
lived through 14.4, so I
yep,
I I I,
14.4,
I
the
feel it.
28.8. I mean,
Yeah.
28.8 was amazing when that hit. So yeah.
Oh yeah.
Uh, so in a lot of ways, that's the way that the current space industry still works. It's almost like these, most satellites still have these kind of dial-up modems, and this is like all of a sudden now you've got fiber broadband to your house for the satellites. It's like this just completely step change in capability, both from a bandwidth and latency perspective. And we already know there's a set of missions that are the FireSat one's a perfect example, right? One of the most important things with this global wildfire constellation is not only making really high quality observations of where fires are and how they're moving, but getting those products and the alerts from them out to the stakeholders as quickly as possible. So things like firefighters, first responders that are trying to respond to a fire or manage resources, deploy them, et cetera. And so being able to get all that data back at extremely low latency, always on, all the time, is going to be completely transformative in terms of our ability to have an impact on the wildfire space. And so we already see a set of missions like that this is incredibly enabling for. And then I think our thesis is that over time, most things that have been deployed to space have been sort of designed with this constraint in mind, that they have a dial-up modem, and it really constrains the types of things that you can do or how you go about doing them. I think when you release that constraint and you have this always on high bandwidth connectivity, it's going to totally transform how we even think about solving missions in space. And I don't even know, I don't even profess to know exactly where all that's going to go. But it's just in the same way that, we've moved from a world with dial up modems and PCs to cloud computing and smartphones in all of our pockets. I think we're going to see a transition like that in space infrastructure.
So I'm just going to kind of take a step back for a quick second. So Muon constructs, it puts together, it manufactures satellite buses, right? And it does this for customers and in such a way that there are add-ons that are modular, right? So that you make it very specifically to the customer's needs, but it's modular, so you can do it quickly, right?
Yeah,
So
I would just maybe clarify a little bit. We are really delivering ultimately what we consider missions. So we do build buses. We also in many cases are building the payloads that go on the buses and a lot of the subsystems required to build the spacecraft. But we also have a global network of, ground stations historically, and now will be tied into Starlink that we operate with. And we have a full-time operation stack as well. So what we offer to our customers is not just a piece of hardware, a spacecraft, but it's an end-to-end mission that ultimately is delivering a service. So it'll be delivering data on an SLA, and a lot of it's completely hands-off to them. So I just wanted to be clear that it's a little broader than just the spacecraft bus itself.
I really appreciate that, because that goes into my follow-on question about the mini lasers, right? Because, if you're this full stack surface, and you're going to have to explain what SLA means.
Oh, sorry.
Just saying. But before you do that, right, this is a top to bottom full stack service, or space as a service type of proposition here. So the question I would have to ask, right, is that will this mini laser be a separate offering for your customers to have at an additional cost, or will this be standard on all Halo buses?
Yeah. So, I mean, let me just define SLA quickly to get that out of the way. So, SLA is service level agreement. This is actually something that's very common in things like enterprise services, where it's basically saying the reliability, the latency, et cetera, that you're agreeing to contractually deliver to a customer. And so, it's kind of an operational, contractual term of art that we use in terms of thinking about that interface with our customers. So, I mean, our goal is to have mini lasers on as many of the spacecraft we're building and operating for customers as possible. I mean, we think that it is uniquely enabling for most of the types of missions we're looking at. There are certain constraints we have with SpaceX in terms of what types of missions we can fly those on. And so there's an ongoing conversation there. So we won't necessarily be able to transition 100%. So right now we are offering as kind of an option to customers. But we're able, for a lot of reasons, strategically, because we believe strongly in this being the future, to offer it on very attractive terms to customers. And so we really do think that it's a future, and we're trying to push wherever possible to get lasers on every satellite that we launch in the future.
And it's not just the Halo satellites too, right? Would you be putting this on your other satellites? And please do remind me of the name of your other satellite, because it was just recently announced, and I'm just trying to keep a lot of different data points about Muon in my head.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, so Halo is what we call kind of our full platform offering. It's not just the satellite, but it's the full thing that includes the satellite platforms plus the operation stack plus the data network, all of that together. And so when we say a Halo satellite, it really just means any of the platforms that we're building and launching under the Halo kind of branding. It's sort of a branding term.
Okay.
And so yeah, so basically we can put the lasers on any of the spacecraft. We have a current generation that we call our M class spacecraft. It's about a 200 kilogram spacecraft that we'll be flying it on next year. And then we also have a much larger spacecraft we're developing that's a 500 kilogram class we call XL, and we'll be able to also fly it on those. So yeah, it'll be a ubiquitous offering across our platform.
And it was that XL that I remember I spied just like yesterday or the day before when I was doing research for this. So I've started with the mini lasers because it really makes one wonder, right, if these mini lasers will also be used with your other customers. Because just before the mini laser announcement, you announced, as in the greater U, the Muon U, that Space Systems Command awarded Muon with a firm fixed price $44.6 million small business innovation research SBIR, as we all like to call it, phase 3 agreement. And phase threes are a really big deal. And the contract is in connection with a space based environmental monitoring mission. And that also has an acronym that is SBEM. And how that's actually said, I'm not really sure. But the SBEM or SBIM or
We say
SBIM,
we say SBIM. I don't know if that's actually right, but we say SBIM.
okay, works for me, right? So the SBIM mission is to use satellites to gather data about terrestrial and space weather conditions. And it's this kind of data that is considered mission critical intelligence for the US Space Force and really for the entire Department of Defense, right?
Hmm.
And getting that data in real time is really important for the warfighter. So this cyber contract is for a 3 satellite demonstration, and it builds on your FireSat constellation. That's the one that looks out for the fires. Would you briefly describe what the deliverables are and when they're due? And will you be using the mini laser capability for this demonstration? And I'm saying this because, right, the first launch for the mini laser is going to be in the first quarter of 2027, right? Well,
Hmm.
the first 2 satellites for this cyber contract, they're also in 2027.
Hmm.
So it kind of makes me wonder, yeah, you going to do a twofer?
Yeah. So let me start off with so this mission is something we're very excited about. That one of the aspects of it that I think we're especially excited about is it's a really unique, I would say, initiative in the Space Force to prove out a truly sort of dual use commercial acquisition. And what I mean by that is We're building the FireSat system, which is going to ultimately be a 52 satellite constellation that has these infrared multispectral sensors on them. And what we identified working with the Space Force is that with some small augmentation of those sensors, not a huge change, but a small delta, we can essentially collect a little bit of additional information that then, to your point, fully satisfies one of these critical mission requirements they have in the DoD for space-based environmental monitoring and theater imagery. And what the goal is to build these first three satellites to prove out that, in fact, the FireSat system can meet that mission requirement. So this is essentially, you can think about it as like a pilot to demonstrate that we can replace the 50-year-old satellites they've been using for a long time to do this. But then the ultimate goal of it would be that we're not building another constellation for the Department of War. We are essentially continuing to build out. I was very careful with that. We're continuing to build out this FireSat constellation with those capabilities. And then the US government, through the Department of War, will become a dual use customer for those same satellites. And so we'll essentially be supporting both the FireSat mission, which is the primary mission of that constellation, but also the Space Force's space-based environmental monitoring mission with basically commercial dual use satellites, which we think is a hugely exciting opportunity for both us and kind of a lot of the things that are being discussed in terms of procurement reform in the government right now. So I think the Space Force is equally those reasons. Okay, so that's all preface to say, will we be using mini lasers on this? So the goal is to, yes, use mini lasers on that. I can't commit to that today. There's still some details that are being worked out, things like timeline, and also just making sure that we're working closely with SpaceX on the details. But it is, again, certainly for the FireSats, we plan to deploy mini lasers on all future FireSats. It's a hugely enabling capability. And we're very optimistic that as this becomes part of that larger FireSat constellation, those satellites will utilize the mini lasers as well.
And I'd love to clarify for our listeners here why there are dueling names for the five-sided building, right? You say Department of War, and I say Department of Defense. You say Department of War for reasons of the customer. I say Department of Defense because the actual name change of the department is not official until Congress actually votes for that to officially be changed. And I adhere to Associated Press rules on naming regimes. So that's why there are two things going on here, and it just should be explained. Anyway, so now, and thank you for answering that, I want to do a bit of a gear shift with you, which harkens back to your past professional relationship and your current kind of Muon FireSat relationship that you have with Google. Because I find Google, well, it's kind of really interesting as of late, right? Because they're involved with the FireSat constellation with that foundation. You've worked for them. Google has an interesting new offering called Alpha Earth Foundations. Mm-hmm. And you can blame Chad Anderson for bringing that to my attention, mm-hmm. right? Alpha Earth Foundations, at least according to Google, the whole point of it is to empower scientists, policymakers, and businesses to monitor and understand global environmental change with unprecedented speed and accuracy. So is Muon in the mix for this initiative?
It's going to be a complicated answer, but I'll do my best. We have a very close working relationship with multiple groups at Google, namely a group at Google Research that was ultimately responsible in many ways for originally conceptualizing the idea of FireSat. So it's an AI group that was basically looking at how they could take AI and apply it to real world problems. And they identified wildfire as a key problem that was, ripe for the picking, I guess. And the way that we got involved with them, and this was 4 years ago, was that they had looked at this problem and said there's a huge data gap. Like if you really want to solve the wildfire problem, you need much better information, both historical and real time for how fires are burning, et cetera.
And hydrology and
the conditions ahead of fire.
Yeah. Right.
And so that kind of actually initiated this long-standing partnership we've had with them to basically architect the FireSat system, which then ultimately resulted in Earth Fire Alliance, the 501c3, getting formed with both us and Google as partners into that, and Google has helped fund some of it. So there's a long-standing kind of relationship there that's really primarily been oriented around this wildfire project. And I think that the goals of Google still, and I'll do my best to speak for them, but is really very much around, kind of the public safety and for good aspects of being able to surface the data from FireSat on their consumer surfaces to help first responders and the public better understand wildfire, and then ultimately to hopefully drive change in terms of how this is managed. But we also have a lot of discussions. That group is intimately involved with a lot of the work on what are called these Earth Foundation models, which are really, a lot of people believe, kind of the next big step in AI, which is moving away from just pure language and into spaces like rich geospatial data, and having models that really are working natively in that sort of data set space. And I think we do see a huge opportunity long term for bringing data sets like that Firesat will create into these models, and really driving a lot of not only the learning process of how they're training these models, but ultimately the output, what the models will be using as inputs to generate, analytic outputs to drive decision making and action and other things. So I can't say anything a lot more specific than that right now, but we have a very tight relationship with those groups, and we're very excited long term about the prospects for bringing those things together.
Now, Chad said that this was really foundational, that this was a really, really big deal. And I've been trying to peel back the layers to understand this more. And it makes me kind of wonder, I mean, is this something that could be actually disruptive to the Earth observation market?
hmm and by this, you mean that, like, the Alpha Earth?
The Alpha
Yeah.
Earth Foundations. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think we believe so, and I mean, a lot of this actually goes back to some of the original thesis for Muon when we started, which was very much that, this was early day, or frankly earlier days of AI when we started, but we were looking at a lot of the things happening in that domain and saying there's, huge transformation going on in AI. These models are becoming more and more capable of solving problems that historically have been very hard to solve with complex data. Geospatial data is a very complex type of data, and so we kind of hypothesize that as those models get better, at some point they're going to start solving real problems. And a good example of this is just in the last couple of years, suddenly we've moved from a place of kind of research around how you would use AI for weather forecasting to a place now where some of these models are outperforming the best supercomputer models in the world. So that's a really good example of how that transition can happen. But we also recognize that as those models suddenly start solving real problems, they're incredibly data hungry. The way that these models work is by ingesting massive quantities of data, learning patterns and things from them, and then using that to model the world. And so our thesis was that as that happens, there's going to be suddenly an explosion in need or demand for new and different Earth observation and other types of geospatial data sets to feed these models. And then there's going to, it's going to kind of create a virtuous cycle between the models getting better, demanding more data. The more data comes and makes the models better, et cetera. And I think we're really starting to see the early parts of that. And I think it could ultimately become entirely transformative on blowing open things like the Earth observation market, because it suddenly creates, frankly, a real commercial reason for it to exist. I hate to say it that way, but the reality is that traditionally a lot of the satellite Earth observation market has been mostly government, sophisticated government customers that really know how to use that data for intelligence purposes. Whereas I think this is now, we're getting into a world where there's a real commercial use case in terms of training and driving these models that could dramatically change sort of the demand nature in the commercial space.
I have to say, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, I was training journalists in the very far northeast of Afghanistan, and in a discussion about, what do the listeners really need to have, right? What news
hmm
is a must have, and that was weather,
hmm
right? And they have a lot of rivers up there, and they have earthquakes and landslides, and they have small patches to farm on and things like that. But everybody listens to the radio.
hmm
So that was their number one thing. So I was kind of wondering, would Alpha Earth Foundations actually democratize access to this data?
So I mean, again, I'm going to have a little trouble speaking for Google in terms of how they plan to fully productize this,
That's all
but
right. Take a shot.
yeah, I'll take a shot. I mean, I think the things that it can do is, I think it can make things like weather forecasting or disaster preparedness much better than they are today, so that it can improve the performance and give us higher accuracy estimates of what's going to happen in the future, what's coming, which is always helpful and impactful. I think it can also unlock things like, you were mentioning local, very hyper local understanding of things like weather. Right now our weather
And
models
water, right?
and
And
water, yeah,
water,
water,
because
exactly,
water is
drought.
a big deal. I mean, they don't up in the great, in the far Northeast, they don't really have droughts, but they do have powerful river and hydrology forces,
Yeah.
right? That shape the land and snowfall that is, astronomical, big time,
Yep.
right? So it's a thing, right?
Yeah, for sure. And being able to better predict that, I mean, better predict that stuff has all kinds of impacts, including national security impacts. I mean, there's a huge drought in Iran right now, for example, and that could have a huge impact on the Middle East. So yeah, I think that's that's kind of the stakes here, right? Is like if you can get dramatically better at doing those things and also answering I mean, I think the other thing these models are going to be good at is providing more than just data. Weather is still very hard to interpret. It requires a meteorologist to take the output of a supercomputer and turn it into a radio broadcast that somebody in northern Afghanistan can understand, right? It's not
But if
not
you go to
trivial.
Anthropic and go use Claude, you can turn it into copy.
Right. Hyper local, hyper customized. And so all of a sudden now you have this tool that can be very empowering for a very wide variety of people to understand something that's very complex that previously would have required an expert in the loop in some way. So in that way, I think it could become incredibly democratizing in the same way, as you say, that like the large language models have become with more textual things.
All right, we're running out of time, but I just can't. I can't not do this. I have to ask this, right? And this is something that's, well, kind of off subject, but I am a baseball fan and I cannot help myself. You're a pitcher. You pitched in a college World Series twice, and you ended your Cardinal career with a 4.38 ERA in 29 appearances. I believe that was just for your junior year and one start, pitching 39 innings. How has baseball influenced how you manage your team or grow your business?
Oh, you're going to ask me a hard question.
With all the love that I have for baseball, yes.
Well, I think that I mean, for better or worse, I'm a very competitive person, stemming back to my time playing baseball, and so I think I approach a lot of things with work and life from a very competitive perspective. So it definitely has influenced that.
Do you have a three
It,
strikes rule or something?
Not really. I mean, yeah, we try not to walk a lot of people more than worry about strikeouts too much. So maybe it's more
Okay.
like try not to have a 4 ball rule. But I think a big thing is playing on teams. At a very high level of competitiveness in my life has really taught me how important the team dynamic is, and I think that definitely has translated very strongly to my professional career. On any team, you very quickly realize, even with baseball, where like pitching is somewhat of a solitary act. You're out there on your own, kind of in individual combat with the hitter, but you're heavily reliant on your team, both for offense, but also to back you up on defense. And that dynamic, really impresses upon you that big things can't happen as individuals. You have to have organized groups of people in lockstep working very well together in performing teams to accomplish things. And I think that it rings more true than anything else from my experience in baseball and translating it to work. I mean, we talk a lot about at Muon how ultimately what we're trying to build is a high performance team. And that is in many ways more important than the technology or the product or anything else. The goal of the company is to build that high performance team, and then everything else flows from that. So to me, that's probably the single biggest takeaway I had from kind of my experience playing baseball.
Jonny, thank you so much for your time, and I can't wait to have you back on the podcast.
Yeah, you bet. No, it was a pleasure. I think there's probably a lot more to talk about, so I hope to come back.
That's it for this week. For your daily dose of award-winning defense coverage, listen to the Defense and Aerospace Report with Vago Muradian. And for the maritime domain, listen to Cavas Ships with Chris Cavas and Chris Cervello. And get your air domain news and analysis from the Air Power Podcast with JJ Gertler and Vago Muradian. I'm Laura Winter. Thank you for listening.